everybody else trying to figure out, what is it that needs to be done. And so why does it matter? If you bring this to other people's attention, why does it matter? Because remember, we're talking about jobs at Google in the tech positions, right? So those are the best paying, outside of the management positions, those are going to be the best paying jobs. And Google isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And they're one of the most powerful, influential companies in the whole country, in the whole world, as a matter of fact. I mean, the government's afraid to take them on head on, at least, like congressmen and, congresswomen, very few will fight these big tech companies. I mean, just out of the fact that they have so much power and influence, they could make they could make your website show up on page 10 of every search, and nobody goes past and so that's where you want your children to be a part of it. As you talk about, artificial intelligence and the control that these large tech companies have, that's where you want to be represented, right? That's where I want my kids to work at, is someplace where I feel like they're going to have some security for a long time. They're going to have a voice to influence, tech companies and their software and their smartphones and devices. They already run our lives, right? So it'd be foolish to not want to be a part of that. I know some people are going to say, well, you're part of the new tyranny. I'm like, hey, look, all I know is when it all adds up and you look at median household income, which is what I have here in front of you, by race and ethnicity, you'll see that Asians, those overrepresented at places like Google, because it's not just Google, it's all Silicon Beach and other tech companies, are their median income is $81,000 per year, whereas Hispanics $50,000 per year. All right, that's what it translates to when you look at, well, why does this mean anything to me? Well, if you intend to be in a place where the income is higher, tech jobs at tech companies is the place to go. Oh, by the way, don't be afraid to stop me if you have any questions about this data. And so I started looking at some data before I offered any solutions. I started looking at some data and just looking at, and I'm headed towards looking at university data, college data, because let's be honest, not everybody is Steve Jobs and Bill Gates that can just, drop out of college, and just start working on some project and go ahead and start, a large tech company. Most of us go get a university degree. They're going to be looking for that in the job application, and they're going to be looking at what you study as well. And so I started with high school and looked at, well, how many people do we have in high school? And 15.1 million, this is funny. I spent hours last night looking for data that said, okay, how many Latinos graduated from high school? How many whites graduated from high school? They give you rates, they give you percentages. You ask how many freshmen entered high school that were Latino, white, or Asian, they won't give it to you, and I got a feeling that there's a reason for that. They're trying to hide something from us. Why not give us that data? But when you look at dropout data and graduation data, you see here that graduation rates are high for everybody. I mean, the flip side of that is you have fewer dropouts than ever, especially for Hispanics. We used to, have the largest dropout rates. And so out of every 10 kids that enter ninth grade for high school, 8 of them will actually graduate with a high school diploma, which is, just one under the Asians, same with the blacks, and one under the whites. So, that gap has narrowed tremendously, which is good news for Latinos. All right, so I asked myself the next question, are we underrepresented at Google then because we don't send enough kids to college, right? And what this graph is showing you is that it shows you from year to year what percent of high school graduates by race and ethnicity immediately went to college right after, right? So they graduated in June. By October, they were enrolled in a 2-year or a 4-year degree university. And you'll see Hispanics back in the year 2000 was less than 50%. 2016 they're at 71% with the Hispanics, right? So they're in the mix. And, but I look at the Asians. I don't even compare the Hispanics to the whites, because, I mean, the numbers show neck and neck, right? Similar graduation rates, similar enrollment rates. But Asians, from the moment that we started collecting data for them back in 2003 or 2004, they were already above the curve.
Yeah, they're always on top.
Always on top. And, they peaked at 90%, but they're at 87%. So that's nothing to sneeze at. And I'm just wondering, because you always, at least when I was going to school, there were always these big arguments and debates about culturally biased tests and, institutional racism. Asians haven't seemed to be affected by that at any point, even though, they're a minority group. They also have a population, significant population that lives under the rate of poverty. They have a significant rate of population that is working class, similar struggles as our own. Yet somehow they figure out how to get most of their high school graduates into college right away. All right. And so that raises a different set of questions. But then I thought, okay, so it's not because we're not sending enough Latinos to college. Let's look at who's enrolled in college, right? And so these are actual raw numbers that you see on this graph. And so you see that in 2016, we had a total of 16.9 million people enrolled in college, right? So about 17 million people going to college at the same time, 2-year or 4-year. And you see that in 2016, whites, they made up 9.1 million out of the 17 million. So 9 out of 17 people were white. But you see Hispanics, nothing to sneeze at. I mean, in the year 2000, we were below 2 million enrolled. It was actually 1.4. And now, as you look at 2016, 3.2 million Hispanics or Latinx enrolled in college. So, that's 9-3. That's 1/3, right? In comparison to whites, and more than blacks and more than Asians, right? So if you take a look at the little chart, the table at the bottom left of your screen, so you see those are the representations. Those are in millions. And we talk about equal representation, right? Equally distributed representation. So let's take a look at that. If you take the 9 million white students and compare them to the general population of white people, so that's 211 million, they make up 65% of the US population. When you take the 9% out of the 17 million that are in college, they're only making up 53% or 54% of the total college enrolled population. And so if you were talking about equal representation, then you see that they're actually underrepresented by 11%. If everything was the same, then there should be 65% enrolled in colleges as well, and there isn't, right? And so Latinos, you take a look at their level of representation in the population and compare it to their level of representation in the universities, and they're actually slightly overrepresented at 18.9%. I didn't know this data. This was unheard of for me. I mean, when I was in high school and I was in college, we would always talk about, the achievement gap. Obviously, there's still an achievement gap if you start looking at grades and what they're studying, I suppose. But in terms of numbers, mission accomplished. All that fight for what were they calling it? Affirmative action. I mean, you can split those numbers and find some other discrepancies. But hey, if you look at this in general population terms, blacks are the same, 13 and 13, and Asians almost the same too. Almost seems by design, doesn't it? I mean, that you have that, but that's what it is. And so it's not because they're not in college. So they're graduating on time. They're, where Latinos are graduating on time. They're, going to college right away, and they have, fair representation at the university level. And so that's not the cause. But now let's look at how things look like a few years later, right? So you're graduating from high school, you're going to be somewhere between 16 to 18. I mean, you can go up to as high as 24, which is why this looks at, what happens, this is the same year, so it's not the same students, but it's a snapshot of what those students that went into high school went into college in 2016, what the future is going to look like. So for Latinos, we had 7 out of every 10 that graduated going to college. Well, what does the picture look like a few years later? So there's your 7 out of 10 that immediately went to college. So, a few years down the road, when they're between the ages of 20 to 24, now you're down to half, right? And the other half is neither in school nor working. So think about that. If you're sitting in a room with 5 people, with 10 people, Latino, ages 20 to 24, you can roll your dice and expect 5 out of those 10 to not be working or not going to school. So what else could they be doing? Is that you or me?
Oh, no, that's a street sweeper.
Okay. With African Americans, it's the same. They lose 2. They started off with 6 going straight to college. By the time they're 20 to 24, only 4 are left. Asians drop 2 as well. So there seems to be a pattern there. But because they started so high at 9, they still have 7, still fighting the good fight going to college, right? And so you got to look at that. If you look at the actual bars for Hispanics, you see that 36% of those that are not in school, not in college, not at working, are poor, right? And there are conditions that come with that, right? The opportunities and the outlook is bleaker than for non-poor. So you look at the percent that are non-poor for Hispanics, and that's 15% of all 20 to 24-year-olds. But for Hispanics, for us, that doesn't mean rich. It doesn't even mean middle class. It just means you didn't make low enough of an income to consider poor. But you can still be near poor, near broke. I mean, we talk about our own personal struggles, and it's like, we're living on the edge, right? One bad accident from being right and poor. So it's not like the outlook is that much better for those Hispanics that are not in school, not at work, and so now we look at associate's degree. Okay, so now we're looking at these kids, or the snapshot of the future of what things are going to look like for these kids when they're 25 to 29. Okay, so for Latinos, when 20 to 24, only half left, right? That, and that's only half of the ones that we actually sent to school immediately, right?
Yeah.
No, actually, it includes all of them. So this includes the ones that didn't go to college immediately. But you have half that are not in school, not at work, and then you have half that may be in school, or may be working, or maybe doing both, which is probably the likelihood for most, right?
Yeah.
And so that's 5 for Latinos, 7 for Asians, 4 for Blacks. And then you think that at this point, the system had done its part. It's separated, the wheat from the chaff, the weak from the strong. Anybody who stuck around was college material. But now we're looking at them with associate's degree. That's a 2-year degree. So out of those 5 that were left, that had the possibility for Latinos, only 3 got at least an associate's degree, right? That means that those other 2 are at work now, right? With the Asians, no change. Not a single thing has changed. Those 7 that stuck in school at least now are at least working. Oh no, these got an associate's degree. They at least, so yeah, they go.
So they continue.
They continue, yeah, all the way through. And then for Blacks, they lost another one too.